Now, Arizona Public Media's Christopher Conover talks to a man who's been described as everything from a libertarian anarchist to one of the most brilliant linguists of our age. Here's his interview with Noam Chomsky, who's in Tucson for a lecture at the University of Arizona.
Joining us now in the studio is Noam Chomsky, who will be speaking here on campus for the next 2 days. Thank you so much for coming in and talking with us.
Glad to be with you.
Earlier today, let me start with this. You were a participant in a news conference here on campus with a group of students talking about University of Arizona divesting certain investments. For those who didn't make the news conference, what are some of those investments and why should the university divest?
The specific investments are in two corporations, Motorola and Caterpillar, and the particular issue is their role in the Israeli-occupied territories. They are both intimately involved in destruction of Palestinian villages, developing settlements, security arrangements for settlers, and so on. And all of this activity is completely illegal. It should be uncontroversial. It's in violation of explicit Security Council regulations. It's in violation of a World Court judgment. Human Rights Watch has called for an end to all such support. Amnesty International, I mean, any authority that there is has declared this to be essentially criminal activity. So therefore, the group is requesting that the university stop participating in it.
You're here on campus to give a couple of talks, one in the linguistics department. You are officially a linguist, but your writings over the years have spanned all kinds of things. You're also talking about education tomorrow night. Now, we want everybody to go to that event at Centennial Hall, but can you give us a little bit of a preview, some of the things you're going to talk about in that speech?
Well, there are fundamental questions about education from kindergarten to universities. One question is, who's it for? And the other is, what does it try to achieve? And there are sharp differences of opinion about this. So if you look at the history of the educational system in the United States, the U.S. was, in fact, the first country to develop a mass public education system, which was a real achievement. At the higher level, higher education, it was mostly a gentleman's club for elites. That's changed. In the Second World War, the whole world system changed. The U.S. had been it was the richest country in the world, but it had been a kind of backwater. If you wanted to study physics or philosophy or be a writer or an artist, you went to Europe. The Second World War changed all that. The U.S. became far and away the most powerful country in the world. Competitors were devastated or destroyed, and the kind of intellectual center shifted here. And the educational systems changed radically. For one thing, there was one change was the GI Bill, which let lots of people go to college who never would have been able to go before. And that slowly undermined the elite character of the major institutions. There had always been land-grant colleges, which, in fact, my own university, MIT, is one of them, and that was public education. But the prestigious schools were gentlemen's club. That changed. Women were allowed in. A huge amount of government money came in for research. There was the government had always been involved in economic development right from the colonies, but it took a huge surge forward after the Second World War. Lots of technology had changed radically during the war and very much afterwards, and the things that we now take for granted, like your iPhone, your computer, the internet, flying on commercial aircraft, satellites, and all of that. Most of that basically grew out of the state sector of the economy, largely through universities. So there's a lot of university funding. It's spilled over to other disciplines. The universities changed. And who they were for became quite different. So in the 1960s, they were, take, say, my own university. In the 1950s, it was white males. By the 1970s, it's half women, a third minorities, and so on, and change in the character of the educational system. Then came other changes. The activism of the 1960s, in my view, really civilized the country. That's what was the core of the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the environmental movement, concerns at a place, a university like mine, research university, concerns over the uses of technology never asked before. And there was a backlash.
Let me ask you about activism on university campuses. We don't see that anymore. And obviously you've been on the MIT campus for decades, so you've seen the change. We don't see the level of activism anymore. Why not?
I don't agree with it. I think we've just changed our conception of what's to be expected. So in the 1950s, it's true, there was almost no activism. The 1960s, for most of the 60s, not much. It peaked in the late 60s. There was a period from about maybe 67 to 71, 72, when there was intensive activism on campus. After that, it leveled off, and it's continued. So if you I travel a lot to universities, almost every one, there's all kinds of activity going on of a whole range of topics, global justice, women's rights, concern over the environment, constant things. I mean, not major demonstrations like 2 or 3 years in the 60s, but it's not the baseline. You know, in general, it's continued. It's now expanding, and it's all over the world. So, for example, in Latin America, there's huge student movements from Chile, which is one of the most active of them, all the way through the continent. It's engaging the United States and Canada. The Occupy movements have a lot of student input to them. There's other things happening on campus, like this, for example, things like this going on everywhere. So there's a level of student activism which is now fundamentally a baseline, which did not exist before the 60s. And there have been attempts to beat it back. I'll talk about that tomorrow, interesting attempts. But I think it's survived.
All right. Well, we invite everybody to come out to Centennial Hall to hear your speech. You and I will be together on the stage for that. So we have a little preview. Thanks so much for coming in and talking with us for a few minutes.
Glad to do it.